In this third video, we'll look at the year 1776, which was so critical in the battle for independence. As 1775 ended and 1776 dawned, there was another battle when Benedict Arnold, fresh off his victory at Ticonderoga the previous year, attacked the British-held city of Quebec. And Arnold got troops both from Fort Ticonderoga and moving up from Boston. And it was an heroic effort, but he had inadequate food and supplies, and it was a really cold winter, and there was a lot of sleet and the snow, and Arnold did suffer a wound in his leg and was declared a hero if he wasn't already regarded as such after Ticonderoga. Many Americans mistakenly believed that the Canadians would join them, that they would see the Americans as liberators. It kind of shows as well that many Americans have long thought that Canada should be a part of a united America. The Americans didn't really understand that the Canadians didn't see the American effort in defensive terms. They thought the Americans were being provocative. In the summer of 1776, after the Americans had their unsuccessful attack on Canada, the British decided to rework their strategy. They decided to abandon besieged Boston and go south and occupy New York City. I should note that the British made liberal use of German mercenaries known as Hessians. Of the 45,000 troops that the British would have moving into New York, about 8,000 of them were Hessians. Anyway, by occupying New York, that would allow them to command the Hudson River Valley, and obviously New York was a key port. In moving south towards New York, however, the British were slow, and that allowed Washington time to move his troops southward as well. In advancing on New York City, the British landed first in Long Island, and where there was the Battle of Long Island in August 1776. The Americans panicked and they fled and even left a lot of their supplies. Washington was furious. British General Howe should have pursued Washington after the Battle of Long Island, but he was probably thinking of Bunker Hill and he decided to wait for reinforcements. That was kind of stupid because it didn't work out that way, great for him, because it allowed Washington time to escape in the middle of the night across the East River into Manhattan itself. Otherwise, he could have cornered the American troops. Washington kept fires going all night on his trenches to make the British think that their army was still there, but they've got boats to ferry them across the East River to Manhattan. When the British advanced finally on Manhattan, the Americans once again dissolved. The British sailed a fleet in to sort of attack New York City from the water, and Howe sent his troops across the East River north of the city onto Manhattan Island, and it threatened to encircle the Patriots, Washington's army, in the city. And yet the American army, as I say, dissolved. It panicked again, and Washington called his troops scum, and he was so angry that they almost had to restrain him from attacking the British lines in the front. He trying to rally his troops. He probably would have been killed or captured otherwise. Once again, Howe should have pursued his advantage, but he decided again to stop and kind of rest. And what that did was that allowed Washington to make it out of New York City into New Jersey before they could capture and corner the army. After the British occupied New York City, there was a couple of months of fighting outside the city before Washington retreated to New Jersey to regroup again, and Howe slowly pursued him southward. Howe parked his troops in winter quarters on the Delaware River in December 1776, confident that Washington wouldn't attack. He knew that many of the militia's enlisted period ended on December 31st, and others would simply go home for Christmas. Washington, however, famously surprised Howe. he crossed the river with about 2,400 men in the dead of night on Christmas Eve and attacked the Hungary Hessians early in the morning, where many of them were hung over. There's the famous painting you see here of Washington crossing the Delaware. It was incorrect because Washington was standing, and clearly that wouldn't have happened. And it was also at night. You kind of get a sense that it's during the day from this picture. Anyway, the British saw attacking at Christmas as barbarian. Washington won the resulting battle, the Battle of Trenton, New Jersey. Washington followed up the victory at the Battle of Trenton in very late December 1776, a few weeks later, by moving on Princeton, New Jersey, just to the north. The Battle of Princeton in January 1777 was another Washington victory, and Washington then set up his headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey, which is in northern Jersey. In retrospect, the British might have been in a better situation if they had not alienated the local Americans around New Jersey, many of whom were not originally rebels. When the British moved out of the city, where there was a higher concentration of loyalists, they began to confiscate housing and food, and that really ticked off the people. Anyway, by the end of 1776, the British commanded New York City and appeared militarily dominant. But Washington had won a few small victories, and it was more psychologically than anything else, certainly with the crossing of the Delaware. 1776 was, of course, memorable more for what was happening in Philadelphia than on the battlefields of the North. All the fighting and the publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense had really fired up the radicals in the Second Continental Congress, and many of the loyalists that had been part of the Congress initially had decided to leave. In June 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia made a motion for independence, which was seconded by John Adams. Congress then decided to postpone debate, but rather voted to appoint a five-man committee to draft a possible Declaration of Independence that they could then officially debate. And on the committee was Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin. The committee decided to let Jefferson be the main author, and Jefferson modestly protested, but Adams reacted by saying, "You write 10 times better than I can." Jefferson at the time was only 34 and still reeling from his wife's many attempts at childbirth. She eventually died from childbirth after giving birth to her sixth child, the third to survive. Anyway, Jefferson went to a Philadelphia boarding house where he stayed and wrote his draft on the second floor. The committee laid Jefferson's draft before the Second Continental Congress on June 28, 1776, and for 4 days they debated whether to adopt it, finally voting to adopt it on July 2nd. They debated the exact wording for another couple of days before beginning to assign it officially on July 4th, 1776. We think of July 4th, 1776 as the founding of the United States. They actually voted for it on July 2nd. John Hancock was the first to sign, and he wrote it in real big letters saying he would write big so George III could read it without his reading glasses. The Declaration of Independence had a number of specific grievances listed against the king. It said things like judges were dependent on his will alone, or the British were raising standing armies without the consent of the colonial legislature. They cut off trade unfairly. There was no trial by jury, and of course there was taxes without consent. The Declaration of Independence, however, is more famous not for its long list of grievances, but for the ringing statements of principle, which shows the Enlightenment concepts, of course. Quote, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal status to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving just power from the consent of the governed, unquote. Keep in mind just how brave signing the Declaration of Independence was. If they failed, they were in essence signing their death certificate. They recognized this, and when at the end they concluded with, "We mutually pledged each other our lives, our fortunes rather, and our sacred honor." It's famous because Franklin had joked, quote, "We indeed must hang together, otherwise we most assuredly will hang separately." I should also add that printed versions deliberately left off the signers' names. As we noted before, Jefferson changed the Locke's property. He said life, liberty, and property to the pursuit of happiness. He did this, I should note, because he didn't want to divide the southern colonies from the northern colonies, and obviously he's talking about property as an inalienable right implied to many people in the South, slavery. After signing the Declaration of Independence in July 1776, the Second Continental Congress formally recommended that individual colonies, quote, "adopt such governments as shall, in the opinion of the representatives of the people, best conduce to the happiness and safety of their constituents in particular, and America in general," unquote. With this request, colonists in each colony began to draft formal state constitutions with elections for governors and state assemblies. As I've said before, the Second Continental Congress also recognized that they weren't a permanent body. They had not been elected. So in addition to trying to run the war in the coming years, they also began to debate over a formal American national government. This would result in the Articles of Confederation, which will be talked about later on. This concludes the third video on events in 1776.